Thanks for joining us today for this BlastLogic webinar. Advanced drill and blast modelling and management tools in BlastLogic allow operations to reconcile post-blast performance using in-field measurements such as fragmentation, vibration and dig rates. Today, Maptek specialist mining engineer Roxana Gianazza will showcase some of the new tools in BlastLogic 2.1, which allow engineers to easily associate spatial measurements taken in the field versus blast design, drilling or charging implementation. If you have any questions during the session, please add them to the questions panel on the GoToWebinar interface. We will try to address them all at the end of the presentation. Over to you, Roxana.
Thanks, John, and thanks to everyone for attending our session today. As John mentioned, my name is Roxana, and I'm a mining engineer with Maptek. I've been part of the BlastLogic team for almost 4 years, and prior to that, I was a site drill and blast engineer in Queensland, New South Wales. As a very quick overview, BlastLogic is a complete design and reconciliation tool for open pit drill and blast operations, comprising of a desktop application for engineers, a tableau for the field crew to record dipping, backfilling, or charging data, and finally a data server. The session today will cover some of the new features in BlastLogic that allow engineers to import any measurements taken in the field for either post-blast analysis or as part of the design process. An example of this data includes, but is obviously not limited to, fragmentation, dig rates, vibration, and overpressure records, but also melt throughput or core quality. During the webinar today, I will cover 2 practical examples. Firstly, I will import some field measurements for fragmentation, and then just give some example of how this data can be used, displayed, and tabulated back to as per hole parameters. For the second part of the webinar, I will be looking at the vibration tool and add some additional data points to calibrate the model for a current tie-up design. From version 2.1 onwards, you're now able to store all type of vibration data and non-overpressure data directly on the BlastLogic server. I'm now going to switch to the BlastLogic desktop application and to start with the exercise. So for those of you that are not aware of this is the desktop application for drill and blast engineers. There is now a new tool under File Setup called Spatial Measurements. Setup site. Spatial Measurements. And basically what it allows you to do is to add any parameters you would like to import as long as you have an XY coordinate to be matched to. So for this example, I've added some fragmentation sizing going from 10 to 90%, top size and top. To add a new parameter, you can simply add plus. Say I wanted to add grade, add an identifier and label. And once that's done, you can basically just import a CSV and off you go. So for this exercise, I will be looking at fragmentation data for a blast that was fired a few weeks ago. So let's bring the blast on the screen. Right click on the name, view selection. To search data collected around the area, I can use my spatial measurement tool under entry, spatial measurements. Make this panel a little bit smaller. And then the second step, I need to draw a simple polygon around the area I want to look at. I'm just drawing a rough polygon on my blast. And as you can see, as I'm collecting this, it's displaying the number of data points available in this area. So currently I've got 1,629 measurements. And at the bottom, you can actually visualize the data that I've sourced up. So I've got my XYZ coordinates for each point, and then measurement from P10 to P90, frag size, and top position. At this point, I can now create a surface to display this measurement in using colors. So create surface. And I'm going to look at the P80 value. And I'm going to use the custom color scheme to limit the range I'm looking at. So let's say I'm going to go from 0 to 12. I'm going to assign spectrum here as well. So color scheme, spectrum, and then spread evenly. Do OK. Now I'm going to close this panel and visualize my surface. So it's under CAD. Got my new surface just created at the bottom. Let's drag that on the screen. So as you can see, for visualization purposes, let's crop it back to the blast by using right-click, crop to frag blast, and I can also display my display map. So right-click again, display color map for the legend. As you can see straight away, most of the blast looks to be between the 5 and 7 to 9 range, but then I have some sections where there's some red areas where the rock sizing was actually a bit larger than average. Obviously, this information itself, it doesn't give me much without comparing to what's happened in the blast. To do that, we can use a previous tool that was available in BlastLogic 2.0 called Create Surface from Holes. So let's click on the blast name again to select the holes, then go Create Surface from Holes. And for this example, I'm going to be looking at penetration rate. So from the drop-down list, I've got a value penetration rate. This was a custom value that was brought in from the new navigation system, but I'm also able to do this with any data saved in BlastLogic, for example, explosive design or actual energy, and also anything that I imported myself, like my frag P80 value or the penetration rate. Look at penetration rate and use the spectrum again. That's it. So I'm going to hide this and open it up as a new view. So go View Surface. And the reason why I'm doing this is because now I want to compare the two surfaces side by side. The quickest way to do that is go under Window and go Tile and Tie. This will rearrange any windows that you got open side by side. So I got my previous surface with my fragmentation 80%, and then on the right, I got my penetration rate. So again, let's display the color map here. And now, because the two surfaces are tiled, I can actually rotate or zoom in a particular area. I also can bring the blast in both of them as well. So by looking at this map, you can identify that some areas where the penetration rate was lower, which identifies that the material there was harder, is actually corresponding roughly to some of the areas that were identified as having larger rock sizes. So this is done for a single blast in this case, but you can see how this can be applied to multiple blasts. So let's look at another example of a new feature in 2.1, and I can actually compare surfaces directly in Surface from Holes. So select the blast again, go Create, Surface from Holes. As I mentioned, this feature was available in 2.0, but in 2.1 you can now use the compare with. So let's say I want to compare my design explosive specific energy and divide that by my frag P80 surface that I've just created. This is just an example of what you'll be able to do with it. So now I've got my new surface, I can bring on the screen. And this is just an example of how I can visualize some of the factors and over time see trends in the data. So this is done for one blast, but let's look like what it would look like for multiple blasts. So I'm going to bring in my two production blasts and my trim. I've got three blasts, but now I actually have a previously generated surface for the entire bench with fragmentation. And you can see here, with my two production blasts, I try slightly different design parameters between the one on the left and the one on the right. And when there's no huge differences, you can see the one on the right has got larger sizing and denoted by the red areas. Another really cool things you can do with this new feature is when not just to create surfaces, but also interpolate data back to your blast. So if you collect the data points with the CSV, but you want to correlate it back to a single OLID, you can do that still using the Spatial Measurement tool. So I'm going to click on the blast name, got Entry, Spatial Measurements, click Reclaim a Polygon, and use the copy to whole properties and select the P80. So I'm just looking at those values for P80. And what this does is it interpolates data so you can correlate it back to whole ID. It will be particularly useful if you've got information coming from the excavators, such as dig rates, which are assigned to a block, but you cannot pick it back to a whole position to a particular design. That's okay, and it's done. So this is it for fragmentation. I'll now be moving on to the vibration component of this exercise. So let's begin at design. And on the blast modeling vibrations. So you can see here, there's been a number of new elements added to the panel from BlastLogic 2.0. Starting from the bottom right, there is the visualization of the current estimate for vibration for this blast based purely on the existing set variable and set exponent. So starting from the right, you got your display of the vibration estimate, the color map that can be adjusted, and color rated as well if you needed to. And then on the left, bottom right, you can see the set variable and current set exponent. And at the very bottom is the propagation rate, timing window, and extent for this particular example. So if I wanted to change my propagation rate, let's go from 2,000 to 100 to 3,000. You can see the graph will change. Also, if I want to increase my extent, say I want to go from 1K to 5Ks, just type that in. And I will just point out, like on the top right corner, as I'm changing my extent, it will also bring up some new stations that are now within the 5K radius from this blast. Let's just zoom out. So you can see at the bottom there, I've got 2 monitoring stations. It's giving me the estimates of my vibration at those points. Station A, B, and C are denoted by 1, 2, and 3 on the screen. And then what I'm able to do now is that I can export this to a CSV. So if you've got a range of stations that I'm monitoring at any point in time, it will give you straight away an estimate for all those data points. On the top left, I've got, it will bring up any local measurements for vibration for this particular blast. And I'm able to filter either by station, location, or date. So this is particularly important as we'll be collecting more and more data over time. So if you're only looking at the last 6 months worth of data, we just want to be looking at a particular location, it will allow you to do that. Locations can be filtered both by XYZ coordinates, but also by tagging. So if I have a particular station I'm interested in, but I'm also looking at different bench areas, I can modify that by tag. So let's add a new data point. So I've got edit observations. Let's say I do have a new value that was given to me that I picked up last week. So I've got add entry. If this data point came from a blast that's been entered in BlastLogic and the tie-up has been done in BlastLogic, I can use the tie-up directly from that, which will pick up a detonation location and an MIC. Otherwise, I can enter that manually by specifying coordinate. I'm just going to pick a random point, and then I have to specify my MIC and custom temp if required. So let's say test. As I mentioned before, this is only required from doing this manually because the data came from an outside source. If the blast has been filed in BlastLogic, I can just use the auto pickup from the top and just drag in the timing, the tie-up that I used. So let's put in the 20 milliseconds, 30 milliseconds per second, and then go OK, and pick my station. So let's say I'm going to use station B. That's it. So now that's been added to the list. And now if I go back to my panel, you can see I've got my last point that I just added. It's been a new dot added in the area because this observation was picked up from my local range that I currently had on the screen. And if I don't want to be using this, I can just exclude it. So I can just untick it. And what I can do now is wanted to recalibrate my model. So currently it's giving me a variable of 1,000 exponent of -1.5. and I can use run to recalibrate the model with the new data points. So you can see the values have not changed. My map has been recalibrated as well. Obviously, over time, like I wouldn't be expecting to do this for every single blast, but every 6 months or so, it's good to have a look at all the entries for the areas and recalibrate the model so it stays up to date. With the stations at the top, if I wanted to filter, I will just give you some example. So filter by station, filter by location, so and giving it a range, or filter by tag. So for the one that I just entered, put in test, and then press filter. It will just highlight the ones that were recently added. Okay, so now I'm going to save my graph to allow me to have a DXF for exporting. Just going to close that. Now I have on my bottom left, I have my 2 new maps created. So one of them will be the vibration lines itself that I can export back to another package. And the second one are the colors. If I zoom out, you can see I can now bring additional blasts or additional objects into this view if I need to, or I can export the lines back to another design package. So that's about it for our presentation today. If you've got any other questions, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, I'll be returning to the slides.
Thanks so much, Roxana, for running through reconciling post-blast performance with field measurements using BlastLogic. I've got a few questions here for you. The first one, are there plans to automate importing spatial data?
Yeah, so I was mentioning this from the question before, but our BlastLogic component, which is currently set up to import drill navigation data, will also support being able to import vibration or any additional data as long as it's been configured accordingly. We support multiple drill navigation systems, so it's a matter of configuring the system to the new data import.
Cool, thank you. The other thing you mentioned at the end about using the vibration model for presentations and graphs and exporting it. How easy is it to export images?
Well, if you don't want to take a screenshot, the best way to get a high quality image is to use the little camera tool, top toolbar, that will allow you to give you a high resolution image of the view that you currently have on the screen, which is great for presentations.
Great. I might ask, while we're on vibration, there's a question, is there a legend for the vibration contours?
There's similar to the other surfaces, I can just right click, display color map, and that's a legend. You can also modify this before creating the surface.
Cool. The next one is back with regard to fragmentation. Is it possible to invert the legend shading for either the frag or the penetration rate? The idea is to make it visually easier to match low penetration rate with high frag size because they would be similar colors.
Yeah, so what you can do when you are using the, I'm just going to go back into the tool, so entry, so I go create surface from holes, and it's from any surfaces when you have a range like this. When you right click on the color scheme, it will allow you to pick one that you would like, but then you can also inverse. So reverse is the option at the end, and it will actually swap the current spectrum that you have selected the other way around.
Cool. One more question. Does Maptek provide services to complete the import configuration for externally sourced data?
This is similar to the question that I answered before.
Yep.
We do have the ability to do that with the integration application, the BLIS, which is normally used for drone navigation system. And if you look at our roadmap, we're actually doing that sometime this year. In terms of what's going to be available first, it depending on our customer's request. We normally configure that as a new request has been made.
Great. Thank you again so much for running through and giving a showcase of BlastLogic's features for reconciling post-blast performance with field measurement. If anyone has any further questions, please contact the BlastLogic team or your local Maptek office for assistance. You can find all the contact details on our website. If you'd like to view this webinar again or share it with your colleagues, it's available online at maptek.com. While you're there, you can catch up on other webinars featuring a whole range of topics. Stay tuned for additional webinars, including the upcoming demonstration of the BlastLogic OData service. Thanks again for watching.